Good evening, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to step in for Jordan Masanga, who's our programs director on the board. Jordan's out of town today, and he got in touch with me and asked me to take on this moderation role. So I'm going to turn things over to let folks introduce themselves, but just to set the stage, I'm confident that most of you have experienced the increasing costs of IT operations with all the advents of XaaS or X as a service. Unlike financial accounting for traditional systems, a lot of these are fixed costs. Spending models for these new platforms are variable. And the challenge for us is to bring financial accountability to all these variable spending models and how to better articulate business trade-offs as we move to the cloud and all the other efforts that we lead. Today, we want to provide a quick overview of technology business management. It's a decision-making framework for CIOs, CTOs, CFOs, and their teams. We'll help to define the tools, processes, data, and people needed to manage the business of technology. And we'll showcase an example of a TBM application for FinOps. It's an application that I got very familiar with. So as a unsolicited endorsement for what you're going to see later, it's a really cool set of tools for those of us in these decision-making roles. And so looking forward to seeing updates around the tool set. You've all been on a lot of these virtual meetings. We want to use the chat tonight for questions that you may have. I'll help to moderate that so our presenters can focus on their content, deliver you some great information, and use the chat to interact, to share a thought, concern, a question, and we'll keep an eye on that. With that, I'll turn things over to our team tonight, and looking forward to hearing about the updates around technology business management. Take it away, folks.
Okay, hey, good evening. I'm Dan Waries. I agreed to go first only because I'm left to right on the chart. Vic and Zach did all the work, so just want to acknowledge them for that. And thanks to Tatiana for the invitation here. So just a real quick introduction. I lead the finance systems at Intel. I've been in the Portland area for about 3 years now, just joined about 3 years ago. And before that, I was with Dow Chemical for a long time. I led finance systems there. And then for any of the FEI folks on the call, I also led cost accounting there for a while. So got a background on both sides of the house.
Thank you, Dan. Everybody, my name is Vikrant Vadi, but I go by Vic. I'm a program manager at Oregon Lottery. I work at the PMO. Main role is to align technology investments to strategic objectives, regularly manage IT programs, work with business cases, ROIs, and have the difficult conversations of saying no to projects, yes to projects, right? So I live in Salem, and before Lottery, I worked in HP for the most part. So I'm very excited to discuss the concepts and the presentation with you.
And hi, folks. Very happy to be here today. My name is Zach Brown, and I'm actually with Apptio, but everything I'll be showing today will be as vendor agnostic as possible. We really want to focus on some of these frameworks and the great value that folks have been able to get. A quick shout out to Vic, who has done a lot of research in the areas of TBM and FinOps, and he'll be doing majority of this presentation. So thank you very much for having us today.
Awesome. Next slide. Just the person who is rolling these slides is Sean Engel. Hey, Sean, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Vic. So Sean Engel, also with Apptio. I'm the area director for the West, and really appreciate this invite and looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. So mainly, there is a lot of depth in these slides, and so we wanted to make sure that it is actually relatable. And so what we came up with is divide our presentation into 3 parts. One is the business problem, and one is the conceptual solutions. So we see how the concepts align together, and then a real use case and a real demo. So people are able to connect the concepts to the demo. Hopefully, by the end of this session, I hope that the folks are able to walk away with an increased understanding of the problem at hand and the potential solutions that are available and how they can solve their problems in their day-to-day world. With lottery, we specifically, that's how this thing got started for us, is we have to identify how we're able to create a better cross transparency, and that aids in better decision making. And as I started to dive through a lot of research, found a lot of solutions and engaged Aptio, and that's how we have created the presentations. Next slide.
Okay, I'll cover this. I do want to say that Bob and I are tremendously aligned. His opening comments were mostly what I was thinking to say. So I won't belabor this. I want to make sure we get into the framework and the demo, and maybe save time for Q&A at the end. You know, I just wanted to highlight, I think a lot of us have been in this on-premise world in the past where, you know, you make big decisions and maybe less frequently. You know, you're buying a big piece of software, you're maybe building a set of servers or an actual data center. And so some of the investments are big and made thoughtfully. And then you manage that, and it's mostly a fixed cost and pretty predictable with, you know, some variable things around the edge. You know, I think going forward, you know, there's still some really big purchases. I don't know if you guys are using, you know, SAP or Workday or, you know, things like this. Even if it's a SaaS sort of direction, it can be pretty big and predictable. But then you get into other kinds of things like, you know, AWS Azure kind of work when you're moving a lot of data or doing analytics. It can get highly variable and sometimes a little bit out of control, depending on how your company's set up and how people are allowed to consume that service. I like to say that cloud is the new server under the desk if you don't identify what your consumption is and manage it. So I think what they're going to get into here, you know, Vic, in terms of the framework and Zach, in terms of some, you know, potential software ideas, I think is a really good way to look through it. And then maybe we just have a good Q&A kind of discussion at the end.
Thank you, Dan. So let's start with problem and the symptoms. I call it use cases. I think some of this you might already be facing in your organization. Generally, what are let's pick a particular persona, a CIO. You might be wondering, how much does it cost to run my applications and what drives it? New projects, new efforts, new software, year over year, cost keeps increasing, right? And it's all on IT because IT manages the licensing and the support. How much money can I save by migrating to cloud? How many times have you heard, can we just migrate to cloud and economies of scale? Logically speaking, you should have a lower expense. How much spend per initiative or business capability? A lot of the time you might be pressed to say, oh, because this business capability is expensive and here is the list of assets that provide that capability, but we don't have a direct way to communicate that information. Infrastructure cost by category. Maybe a certain infrastructure, the networking is very expensive as compared to other different assets. And is there a way for us to benchmark in the industry and see how come my organization is spending so much on the networking as compared to the other organizations of the same size? So we don't have that information. So what we run into is a lot of questions, right? And from a CFO point of view, the question always is, are folks just aligned in their spending to the financial plan and agency strategy? Are we approving projects that are not directly connected to the strategy, and how is the spend happening across all of these efforts? And then how does these current spend patterns will affect forecasting, especially when it gets to cloud? How can you estimate the volume? Because it's based on the usage. Can you ID short-term cost reduction opportunities? So this came up in pandemic, especially for lottery, where there was a revenue loss period with the stuff getting shut down. So then now the question is, where can we cut the money temporarily to survive for a couple of months until it opens up? So can we ID some short-term opportunities, cost reduction opportunities, but how can we get all this information quickly to business and finance and stay on the same page on how to prioritize this investment? And in general, folks, if you look at the agency, folks are always kind of looking at the numbers and go, why is IT costs on the rise, right? And what is a good, how many times you've seen this, oh, we want to spend, we want to keep the lights on, it's going to cost us a lot. Well, but what about my innovation opportunities that I need to do to stay competitive? Well, how much? How much is the operations? What is a good balance going forward? So there's a number of questions, right? So overall, all these questions, you can see, you can view them as symptoms. And the symptoms is there's an underlying problem. Is IT better able to communicate its value? Are we being meaningfully cost transparent? Are we enabling the decision making based on the data? So today, this gets done, right? This gets done through Excel, various number of in-house apps, and sometimes on ad hoc basis, maybe a yearly forecasting, but things are changing. The impact of digital transformations, we need to move fast. So how can we quickly produce these reports, align on our strategy, and help executives make a good decision, right? So that is the problem. So let's look into the solutions that we have. Next slide. There are two potential solutions, and they are complementary. The solution number one is TBM, in short, but it's technology business management, and it is a value management framework for decision making. And we're going to go through the details of TBM in the next 5-10 minutes, and then we'll jump to FinOps, which would be the next solution. After we understand the concepts behind these solutions, I'm going to pass the baton to Zach, who would then walk us through with a demo where you can see those how a particular tool imbibes all these solutions and enables you to see what kind of value you can get out of it. Because the concepts are independent of the tool or the vendor. And TBM and FinOps both are nonprofit entities, and their main focus is to enable better practices, guidelines on how we solve the problems of cost transparency, right? So let's deep dive into TBM.
You have worked then, right?
I'm sorry, Pradeep. Okay. Looks like if you see what this framework that you're seeing on the screen, this is just a summary view, a quick one-slider, and we're going to go a little bit more detailed. We wanted to start from the top. TBM is a collection of a framework, a taxonomy, model, and metrics. I don't expect you to remember that, but it is a bunch of tools that enables that when you put them together, it enables you to make the decisions. So what you're seeing on the screen is the framework is divided into 3 pieces. On the top, you see the common data sources. Today, you may have financial data across various resources. Maybe in your ERP system, that's your general ledger. Maybe your asset inventories through your ITSM ServiceNow systems, example. Maybe you have payroll systems. Maybe you have trouble tickets in ITSM, or maybe you have project information in your PMO systems like Clarity or Smartsheets, whatever you use. And then you also have on top of it, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Amazon giving you some server and storage management tool. So there is a bunch of information available that is related to technology investments scattered around many of these tools. And quite frankly, all of these tools do give you some information on cost transparency. But when you try to consolidate them and align to your organizational strategic objectives, it becomes more challenging. And so this model is designed in a way where you ingest data from all these sources. And after ingesting, it has a taxonomy and a model. So we can connect the views of a business person to a finance person to an IT person. So we're all talking the same language. And that's quite a bit of work because industry is constantly changing and new things are coming in. Somebody has to map all of that. And that's where the TBM Council, the nonprofit council, comes in, where they map it and these technologies implement that mapping. So, so there is more clear alignment of these three different stakeholder views on how a cost is processed all the way through. So that's once you implement that model, what you do see are those metrics that you see on the screen that all the stakeholders can sit at the table and understand and align on the same page, right? So that's the summary view. Next slide. So TBM framework, as I mentioned before, TBM is a collection of things. One of the things is a framework. If you see the way the framework is designed is mainly it is positioned for value and continuously improve. And those are the top two gray buttons. That framework defines the roles of a TBM, who should be doing what, and associated value creation. But it is designed in a way that you can continuously improve and you position your organization for value. And there are 4 core disciplines that you're seeing on the screen: creating transparency, delivering value for money, shape business demand, plan and growth. So create transparency is about, do we know the total cost of delivering business capabilities, including per unit cost basis? Delivering value for money is about, have we considered tech cost and non-tech cost? Can we manage the cost of those business capabilities, cost per transaction, or monthly cost of subscribers? Are we at that point where we're able to communicate that? Shaping business demand is about cost of tech baking into your product pricing. And then planning and governing for value is about your technology budget is always linked to your product budget and a service budget as we move fast, right? So this framework enables you to have all of those. And ultimately what it does is it enables you to have a value conversation. So what do we mean by value conversation? It is the trade-off conversation for optimizing the running of business and the shifting the investments to change the business. For example, should we increase investment in disaster recovery in order to reduce the risk of business interruption? Or should we cut spending on back office apps in order to fund improvements in customer-facing services? So those are the trade-off conversations that we need to have, but this framework and the process and the model and tools all collectively enable you to have the insights to make those conversations. Next slide, please. So from a TBM taxonomy, I think this is where it's important to talk about the TBM Council. It's a nonprofit council, nonprofit business entity. I believe it's more than 10,000 members. It's a business entity. They're primarily dedicated to advancing the discipline of TBM through education, collaboration, and standards, right? So what they do is they provide a generally accepted way of categorizing and reporting IT costs. And the idea behind all of this is the goal is we have to establish a common language and structure. So everyone is talking about the same thing in the same way. And that's the general idea of this, especially through these different stakeholders. So what you're seeing on the screen is 4 layers. On the top, you have business capabilities, followed by applications and services, IT towers, and cost pools. So if you're a finance person, you're already thinking about the cost pools. And how is your cost pool connected to an IT tower? And that's where the IT conversations. IT then talks with business from IT towers to applications, applications to business capabilities. And you see examples of cost pools and IT towers and applications and business units. So this is pretty common in most organizations. You're pretty much dealing with the same IT towers. You're probably dealing with similar cost pools, similar type of application services. So this kind of taxonomy is maintained by the TBM Council. And then the tools are designed in a way to incorporate that. So that enables, so when you move from organization A to B, you're still using the same language and you're also mapping all the way through. When someone says, I want this particular capability. Let's say if you're a hospital CIO and you want to improve your reservation scheduling system, that's just a front-end business capability. Now let's talk about the application, a SaaS application. All right, let's talk about maybe you needed a networking so that you can have a faster communication for the SaaS application, which is the IT tower. And then how does that cost translate into your cost pools? Or maybe you need a external vendor to come and implement. So all of those get connected in one way or the other. And that's the kind of mapping that the TBM framework allows us to do. Next slide. So what you're seeing here, we just talked about taxonomy, right? It's about having the same language. Now we're talking about the model. The model is where you're allocating the spend against the right cost pools and IT towers to provide a consistent view across disparate teams and for benchmarking against the industry peers. So the model, it provides the elements that are needed for mapping and allocating costs to other resources from one layer of the taxonomy to the other. So the model will include the taxonomy objects, allocation rules, so you don't have to worry about it, metrics and reporting, all of those inbuilt. So if you are doing this for the organization, right away, all of those things is set up. You just have to provide the right data sources, work with your finance teams and align on the taxonomy and allocation rules, understand allocation rules and see what custom rules may need to be applied for you or your organization. But there's a lot of those things are industry practices already defined, and then you just link all of them together. And that's how you get a consistent metric. Next slide, please. So what is the, now that you've seen the model and the mapping between these various layers, what kind of metrics can you expect from a TBM solution? Pretty much the similar symptoms that we saw in the beginning, the common use cases. Are you spending what you expected to spend? Which areas of the spend are over or under the plan, right? So that's your IT spend versus plan, OpEx and CapEx variance. Application and service total cost. What does each IT offering really cost to deliver? What areas of spend are over under plan? So you need all of this information, and you use the framework to get those information. Infrastructure, how efficient are we? We may have bought a large cluster, we may not be using all the machines, and we may be wasting resources and then quickly add up. But how are we doing the cost optimization? So I think that's where the infrastructure unit cost versus the benchmark. So for an agency of my size, what should I be spending as compared to the other agencies? And if mine is really high, I probably need to take a look and see why it is high. And then also the project metrics, because projects are cost. So getting an idea of percentage of projects on time, on budget, on spec, and then meeting SLAs, the operations. So there are a number of metrics available within the TBM framework that you can right away process for your needs. And tools like Aptio, and they are set up in a way they implement TBM. So once you provide your data, then you'll be able to run the reports. So that's pretty much a conceptual understanding of TBM. And as you can see, TBM, so far when we have talked about, we talked less about cloud, right? And then that's where the next piece comes in, the FinOps piece. Together, TBM and FinOps are complementary in understanding, the cost transparency. So for FinOps, the practice of bringing financial accountability to the variable spend model of cloud, enabling distributed teams to make business trade-offs between speed, cost, and quality. The challenge is a little bit different than TBM. In FinOps, the spend is day-to-day basis, right? Maybe 1 or 2 updates per day. Your developers are constantly buying new environments, new subscriptions. Quite a lot of the time, it takes a lot of time for the executive team to understand, to reevaluate whether the spend is justified. The reason is when you, in the fast-moving agile world where we're churning in products and services quickly, we do an MVP, and then we do a app 1 release and 2 release and 3rd release, and then all of a sudden we see the cost spike up because there's a lot more usage and it's hard to predict. So how do we forecast and how do we make sure that we're in control of the situation, right? So that's where the FinOps its primary focus is to solve the problem of cloud spending. To explain this, let's dive into a persona. Maybe it's almost like a narration of a story. What you're seeing on the screen is a typical scenario. Elliot, who is the CIO, he's recently moved to the cloud, and cloud migration is all good, but he's shocked by the bill. And if you see Felix, who is the project manager who's responsible for cloud migration, he was given $50K budget to develop client extranet, underestimated cloud resources, so exceeded the cloud budget by 25K. And that's a small number. In reality, usually it's a lot more. And he has no clue who is using what resources, right? Because you may have AWS, you may have Azure, or you may have Google Cloud across the organization, depending on the organization size. So you don't have a clear understanding of what those resources are, what those usage is like, when it's getting turned on, when it's getting turned off, how effectively it's being used. So the challenges of cloud migration is really over a period of time, the cost gets increased, and now it's into the CFO's desk. And this is where the FinOps framework will help you have that conversation. The FinOps framework, essentially what it would do is, if you apply the practice, the principles, and the mechanisms in FinOps, then the FinOps would actually reveal information like this. The cloud resources were underestimated at the beginning. More developers needing subscriptions were added halfway. Excess creation of virtual machines, right? People assume they're developers, they're solving the problems of the product and business needs. They're focused on creative problem solving. They're not worried about the costs. And so they keep adding those virtual machines, and they add up. Improper use of IP addresses. There is a better way to manage your technical infrastructure, but they've just used a lot more IP addresses than they needed. Dormant resources, load balancers, and network segments. So you have resources that are heavily underused. So what you have in a cloud platform is a quick access to buying cloud infrastructure, but also very inefficient access. But the FinOps framework will reveal you all of that. And then in the framework, will also give you guidance on how to remediate that. And so some of the guidance would include information like tagging. So tagging of resources. And so you will know where these resources, first of all these resources have an identity, and then they're grouped correctly, and they're linked to the right business entity. And then you can maybe establish a monitoring and alerting system to target spending. Maybe the CIO decides, okay, here's the limit we have. So for the next 3 months until the next fiscal year planning, let's get some alerting and monitoring in place so we can make sure that we're not overspending. And then realistically estimate resource needs by having tough conversations of what is the kind of volume we want to have and what is the business problem we're solving. Is this spend really necessary right now for this particular application? Prioritizing. And also set resource blocking for those who exceed the usage parameters. So you can establish some mechanisms to control that spending. And on top of it, you want to solve this problem for good. So you establish a governance mechanism as defined in FinOps, where you can have policies for IT spend, and you can develop those communication protocols for how people should manage those resources in the cloud, and develop overall an awareness and communication approach to educate users. And that's FinOps framework takes into account ongoing problems, ongoing issues in clouds, and comes up with a design pattern, a solution pattern, and provides guidance on how to solve the problem of cloud spending. Next slide. Which brings us to the actual framework. So this framework, you'll see, I pulled it from the FinOps Foundation. FinOps Foundation is, again, another nonprofit foundation. It's dedicated to advancing people who practice the discipline of cloud financial management through best practices, educations, and standards. And that's the main goal. What you're seeing on the screen, however, is the framework. It describes the principles, the personas, and best practices and domains. So And I'll walk you through all of this because it's kind of an important information. What we're moving away is from a yearly budgeting, single organization responsible for finance and planning, but have a collective team ownership where the teams, a small set of focused team called the FinOps team, and that's what you're seeing on the personas. You need these kind of roles to drive, to manage cloud spending. So you start with the FinOps practitioner, who was basically a balance between finance and IT, who can talk both languages to some extent. Because the engineering folks are busy solving problems, finance folks are asking the cost questions, and someone who is able to understand, okay, why are you solving the problem this way? How are you breaking it down? What are the linking to the business units? You need someone like a FinOps practitioner to ask those questions and map them. And you have an executive buy-in and a product owner who is driving the product, the finance and procurement person who is helping with the rate negotiation as we go into cloud. How do we negotiate? And then engineering team, which actually is consuming and buying on a daily basis to solve those product problems. So this is a set of a team that have to work collectively together and set targets together and drive for the organization. And if you see the principles, it's obviously that these teams need to collaborate and talk to each other. Everyone takes ownership for their cloud usage. And as we mentioned, we talked about the centralized team that drives the FinOps. The goal should be that report should be accessed anytime, and it should be available in a timely fashion whenever you need. And all the decisions are driven by the business value of cloud. And the last thing you're seeing is taking advantage of the variable cost of the model. Is you can view that as a risk, but you can also view this as an opportunity because you have the ability to just-in-time planning and you can adjust the capacity. And that's the way industry is going. So we need to embrace that variable cost and see how we can mitigate the risk, right? If you see on the down below, you have the domains. So there are multiple domains FinOps talks about. It exposes your cloud usage, how you're using the cloud, and the cloud cost, performance tracking and benchmarking, so you know whether you're overspending for your organization or not. And then a real-time decision making, because you will get reports. When you need something, you right away know where the cost is attributable to which business unit, and you know that complete mapping. So you're able to make good decisions on whether that particular spend is necessary at this point of time or not. And then cloud rate optimization. Cloud rate optimization, this is where big companies like AWS or Amazon AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure, there are some best practices nowadays where you can reserve instances and you get bulk discounts, but then you still have to have some mechanism to manage that you're using them effectively. So there's some level of rate negotiation that can happen, and FinOps has those guidelines on how you can understand how these systems are set up, how these rates are set up, and how you can drive a good deep discount when, for example, with Amazon, with the reserved instances, maybe you do a 1 to 3 year commitment. Once you do 1 to 3 year commitment, you will have a significant drop in price reduction, but then you have mechanisms to control overspending through monitoring, alerts, setting targets, and all the FinOps practices. That's the way you manage your cloud overspending. With respect to cloud usage optimization, it's about pushing the development team to think about where there is a waste. Are there virtual machines that are not being used? Are we overspending for a particular application because a particular product owner is really passionate about a future upcoming need, but it's 2 years down the lane, but they still bought something big? So it's taking a look at the inventory and kind of digging in and challenging those questions and making sure that we're using optimally, and if not, releasing those resources and freeing ourselves from the unnecessary cost. But that takes a concerted effort from a dedicated team to go and push back, right? I'm a developer, I don't care about costs. I'm thinking about solving the business problem. If I'm a product owner, I'm also really not thinking about the cost unless it comes to me. I'm thinking about what value I serve for the customer. From a FinOps practitioner, they have to balance all of this with the financial targets we have and better communicate how we're spending in cloud and drive optimal cost optimization by working together as a team and setting goals for the team on a quarterly basis and then looking after it. It's a concerted effort that needs to happen to manage cloud. And that's what these FinOps practices recommend and these tools that are built in for. All right, next slide. So the next slide, if you see in FinOps, essentially they break it down into 3 phases, and you'll see more of this in Zach's presentation, but how we go about it. But essentially, if you were to look at this, the first phase is about understanding your cost drivers, right? It's about show the teams what they're spending and why they're spending, identify that information. That is the first phase. And that's going to be a cultural shift because someone is now challenging how we're spending. So cost efficiency should be a metric for these engineering and development teams, right? In the optimize phase, we are able to identify and measure efficiency optimizations at a very high level. We're able to go back and see where you can optimize the usage, you set goals on the rate optimization, educate the users, compare the services and workload placements. So there's a bunch of strategies that you can do to optimize. Once you get to that point, now the next point is operating. Now you're at a point where the process are very deployed in an automated way. They're very reliable. You set a goal, you have some metrics that indicate how far the goal is achieved. And the organization is continuously evaluating those objectives and metrics that they're tracking. So that is the state that we want to get to. And for all of this FinOps, they recommend a crawl, walk, run strategy. So you take a small source, start small, create value, and then slowly expand. But essentially, the key point is the cloud spend has 2 big parameters. It's your usage and it's the rate. So either you use less to achieve what you want to achieve and then pay less for what you need through deep discounts or right sizing or automating. So those are the things FinOps tackles. So what's great about DBM and FinOps is there is a dedicated group of individuals that are committed to make this conversation, this value-based conversations more meaningful and efficient for a large majority of the people. And this is a better way for IT to communicate value when you use these tools. So you're essentially behaving like IT as a business because you're talking about cost drivers, you're charging back, you're explaining how a particular business decision impacts IT spend, and or you're truly a strategic partner to the business every step of the way when they're trying to build something new. You right away linking all the different components that go with it. Next slide. 2 more slides here. So some of the popular metrics in FinOps is, measure the cloud spend for a particular application against the total revenue. You may have a bunch of products, but not everything may create even similar revenue. Are you able to measure the cloud spend against the total revenue? Maybe against your cloud spend against the paid subscribers, how many subscribers you have, or maybe the cloud spend against the shipments that is made. So there's a number of ways you can dissect and link it to the business cost. That way they're able to understand. So this gets very complicated once you start getting into microservices and Kubernetes, where a lot of things are packaged together and multiple business functions are embedded in a particular container. And FinOps has all those guidelines for that. So, and that's a great thing about this community is they are looking into the cutting edge problems. So for a lot of agencies, those problems have already been addressed in the FinOps guidelines. So in the end, you're able to clearly communicate that it costs a certain amount of money to serve customers who bring a certain amount of revenue. Having those conversations is huge for making decisions on continued funding of the product or expanding or innovating. Last slide. So what I would like to finish off today's call is, if you look at how TBM and FinOps, two completely different solutions. If you have questions about when should I use what, the recommended approach is where the IT spend is heavy, but there's not much of a cloud spend, TBM can satisfy most of its needs. And then where there is a high cloud spend, but but not necessarily a lot of on-premise IT spend, FinOps, like born in the cloud companies, FinOps would be a good start. But the companies where we see majority have a combination of good amount of IT spend and the cloud spend, those are the ones that can leverage the complementary approach of TBM and FinOps. Together, we can bring the financial accountability for IT cost and IT spending. And that's why it's a three-legged stool of the economy, is as you're seeing more and more agile practices, more autonomy to the individual teams, the development teams, and FinOps and TBM, they are three-legged stool of the cloud economy. But if we can drive them together, we'll be able to better share, better understand the cost drivers and make meaningful decisions. So that's the end of the presentation, and I would like to pass the baton to Zach, so you can digest whatever the concepts that have been said in some meaningful demo.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Vic. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right, and just a quick check, Vic or Sean, could you let me know, can you see the screen here? And then also my red little presentation tool. I'll be doing some doodles today, so hope that's all right, folks. Now, what I want to cover today is just a quick high-level demonstration of both TBM and FinOps. I'm going to do my best to keep this just completely vendor agnostic as well, but we're going to start with TBM. And then after we talk through TBM and show you some examples of those use cases it solves, so those specific metrics it addresses, those views and those personas, we're going to shift into FinOps. So right now, let's start with TBM. And before I actually hop into the solution that I want to show you all, I want to start with that taxonomy that Vic mentioned and just give you maybe a 2 to 3 minute overview of how it works. We always get questions whenever we start showing our solution. Okay, those are great views and they'd be really meaningful to me, but how do we actually get there? So let me give you a couple examples before we hop into our tool. So what you're seeing right now is really this industry standard classification taxonomy put out by that TBM Council. We'll break up costs into these 4 key areas, and you'll actually see these areas throughout our demonstration. So business units, although these are really just the consumers of your IT services and applications. So if you're in the public sector, this might be more along the lines of a department or an agency, but think of this as just the top of the model, the consumer. This next level is really applications and services, right? This is the value that IT is actually delivering. And one of our goals through TBM will be uncovering that fully loaded cost of these apps and services. So we'll make sure that we talk about that in our demonstration as well. As we start moving down the model, we get to a couple of these other classifications. So IT towers. This is really designed to be an IT-centric view of all of your expenses. And finally, cost pools, which is much more of a financial view. So with that high-level overview, let me just give you an example of how some costs might actually flow up and then down our model. So we'll start out with these actual and planned costs for many of the organizations that use this framework, this might include a GL. This also might include an invoice or actually a series of invoices. Many of those organizations practicing TBM might even have hundreds or thousands of different invoices and GLs that get categorized here, so that when they actually start grouping these into those cost pools, this is going to give them really nice insights and actually benchmarking both internally and externally. So that classification into those cost pools, really important, and will give us a nice financial view across your entire IT tech stack. From there, we start moving into those IT towers and this IT view of the world. And I'll actually give you an example of this. So we might have, as part of the data sources that Vic mentioned, maybe we have a staff list or a labor file, maybe a PeopleSoft type file. Well, you might have some internal headcounts who have specific roles related to a data center. So we can go ahead and flow those costs up the IT towers. Similarly, you might have maybe a contractor that actually does some application development or support. So you can really start to see how we can start to roll these costs up through each of these 4 areas in our taxonomy. And this is going to give us that IT view. As we really start moving up the model and getting to the services, getting to business units, really our goal here is just understanding what IT is actually costing the business, but what value that's driving. And what we'll want to see that we'll actually do in our demonstration here in just a minute as well, is we'll start at the top of the model. We'll show you a consumer of those IT services, and then we'll actually drill down, see which services they actually consume. We'll drill down and show you that IT view of the world. And then we'll drill down and show you that financial lens as well. So take a look for all of those capabilities in our demonstration. I've got one more slide before I hop in, and that's just a quick callback to this slide that Vic showed earlier. I think this is a great high-level slide for TBM. You'll see that high level, we have all of those common data sources that he mentioned. And a big part of TBM is actually aligning all of these disparate data sources. For example, you might have several contracts that you can then line start and end dates to specific applications. You might have internal or external headcount that we can align to those applications. And then all of a sudden, now that app spend that we see, we'll have a really good idea of what we can actually eliminate today if we needed to make a pivot or if we needed to reinvest based on what is actually committed or not. So I want to bring that up because we'll see that in our demonstration a little bit later. Now, this entire model is designed to help our specific stakeholders and our key personas. Today, we're going to be focusing at the CIO and CFO levels, and we're going to answer some of these outcomes, these questions. So we'll take a look high level. What is the TCO of our apps and services? What value do these actually drive? And then who's actually consuming these? Finally, we'll take a look at understanding our applications. We'll then look at optimizing our O&M and funding new DME initiatives, or if we need to look at run the business, grow the business, how we can actually start to reinvest. So those are some of our goals today. I know we listed quite a few things, but I just wanted to start here with the how before we actually get into some of those views. So from here, I'm going to pivot into our example Atom dashboard. Now, our quadrants here are going to align exactly with that taxonomy that we just mentioned. So up at the top here, we'll have that business view of the world. And in this case, we actually might bring in some additional data. Maybe we align this with some projects data, and then we can start classifying some of those costs into that run the business, grow the business, transform the business, or keep the lights on versus grow, whatever those investment classifications are that are important to us. We'll have that financial view of the world that I mentioned with those cost pools. So you'll be able to see what your IT tech stack fully loaded is costing in terms of OpEx and CapEx versus plan as well. You'll be able to see your variable versus fixed, understand what levers you might have, what your committed spend is, and where you might be able to move some things around. This view of the world will also give you those different cost pools by things like your department or your business unit owners. In this case, maybe we see that our Alex Smith has a pretty high proportion of their spend on software relative to all of our other owners. Maybe this is something we can dig into a little bit or actually start asking some of those value questions, value conversations that Vic was mentioning earlier. We'll take a look at our application and services view of the world. So we'll see what that TCO of our apps and services are. We'll break that out into those meaningful categories, maybe run versus dev. And then finally, we'll also have that IT-centric view of the world as well, where you can see what are your data centers costing? What's the servers? What's the storage? And finally, if we look at those IT-centric towers pivoted by an area that finance might care about by cost pool, what do we see? And how do these patterns actually change? So this will be our dashboard that we use for our demonstration today. We're going to hop into a couple key vignettes designed to address some of those value conversations. So the first thing that I'm going to show you, we're actually going to dive into business units. And our goal here is to start at that top layer of the model. What we want to do is show exactly who is consuming your IT services, what services, which applications they're consuming. And then we want to actually understand that fully loaded cost of those services at each of those different layers of our model. So we'll see the cost of those services by those IT financial cost pools, by those IT towers. And then we'll start to understand as well how we can show value for dollars. So let's go ahead and click into business units. And whenever we're taking a look at our business units, our departments, our consumers, our goal here is really building trust between IT and the rest of the organization. We want to change that conversation from, well, why does IT cost so much, to what value is IT actually driving? So to answer some of those questions, you're going to want to see that fully loaded cost for all of your business units, departments, consumers. You might need to see this tracked and trended over time, where you can easily click down to see peaks and troughs to start asking some questions around who's spending more on what. We might want to take one of these consumers and actually slice into them for some more specific information about the apps and the services that they're consuming. In this case, our financial business unit, we can see what that run versus investments or run versus grow looks like tracked and trended over time. We can also see which applications this is consuming and break those out versus app run or app dev. We mentioned connecting those disparate sources of data. Well, we also might align this model to use your CMDB or something like a ServiceNow. And then we can take a look at those applications by a life cycle or even slice by an objective. Maybe you have some spend that you're spending on applications you intend to eliminate that we can now surface. We'll see in a little bit here how we can take this eliminate spend, figure out what we can actually do, what's addressable now versus later, and what levers we have to start reinvesting this around the business. Before I get into that, I want to quickly cover services. So we said that our consumers are consuming your IT apps and your IT services. Let's talk about those services. I'm still zoomed into that same business unit for finance, but now I'm taking a look at both direct and indirect services. I might want to view my services by a type, such as business applications or end user services. In this case, I've got two end user services. Let's take a look at communication. So we mentioned that what we wanted to show for communication was the fully loaded cost of this service, and then seeing this service through those different lenses, through the financial lens, the business lens, the IT lens. So whenever you're taking a look at one of your services, at a glance, you should be able to identify who owns this, what our investment objective is, what actually makes up this service. So whether this is a service, whether this is a capability, whether this is a project, what's actually going into this? In this case, we see both Skype and WebEx. We might be curious from a business perspective, who's actually consuming this service. In this case, we can see all of our different business units. They're consuming user accounts, and we can see that number as well, giving us both OpEx and a unit cost that can then be tracked and trended over time. From an IT view of the world, we can move down that model from that apps and services layer down to that IT towers layer. And now we can see the cost of this service by tower. I know something that Vic mentioned for the lottery was that they actually had a communication service where a majority of that cost was in network because of the internet costs associated with that. So we want to make sure we're factoring those in. Similarly, we can see the cost of that service by those financial centric cost pools as well. I'll hop back to my services summary. And what I want to quickly show from this is that we can take that TCO from those various services. We can also relate this to your quantity and that value that you are delivering to actually arrive at unit costs. So one of our goals for TBM is not just what value we're driving, but that fully loaded cost of your services. How do we get to that unit cost? And you can use this unit cost and actually start enabling things like showback or chargeback around your organization. In this case, we might recognize that WebEx looks like $30 more per head, and we have almost 700 users. So if we can actually do some rate setting or some incentivization to get your business units, your consumers using more Skype, we have some significant savings potential just from that. Now I'll pause for just a minute. We've talked very high level through seeing those different aspects of our taxonomy, those 4 key parts of our model, and we talked through business units and your consumers. The next lens I want to take a look at is our applications, and then start to talk around reinvestment. In a similar view to your services, that TBM model will allow you to understand your TCO for your applications. In this case, we can see what our top applications are spending fully loaded. We can understand those applications based on key drivers that might be our unit of measure as well. And in this case, we actually might see that some of our applications look really similar. Maybe we have similar versions of an application, or maybe we have something like a Salesforce and Oracle, which are both CRMs, but one's actually earmarked to be eliminated. So let's take a look at what's in that Oracle CRM cost. Just like you can drill down and see that service TCO by each of those different layers of our TBM model, we'll be able to do that as well with applications. So now we can understand the total cost of our Oracle by those cost pools that we mentioned, by those IT towers as well. And then something I hinted at earlier was using those disparate sources of data to also combine, and then actually using things like your contract start and end dates, whether you have internal or external heads as well, to actually start classifying things as addressable versus non-addressable. So this might be something we use when we're actually taking a look at reinvestments. On that theme of reinvestments, we might want to look at addressable versus non-addressable across our entire application portfolio. So here you can see those costs broken down by what we can do something about and what we cannot do something about. We might filter this down to only look at apps that we intend to eliminate. And now this could represent some really nice low-hanging fruit. These are dollars that we could go ahead and save. These are headcount we could go ahead and redeploy, or maybe contractors we could go ahead and eliminate. And as just a quick summary of what that might look like, here's our Oracle CRM application. We have a number of internal heads that are working on development. So maybe we can actually redeploy a couple of those. We have some external development as well. So these are our contractors. Maybe we can just go ahead and eliminate these and actually start to achieve some of those cost savings. We might have various parts of our software or hardware contracts that we can address now rather than later. And all in all, just by looking at this one application we intend to eliminate, we've already identified some key areas of both cost savings and labor resources that can then be redeployed. So what we've shown so far is high level. We've talked about how that Atom taxonomy works, how we start at the bottom with those financials, how we take this to the cost pools layer, to the IT towers layer, apps and services, and finally those consumers of that service. We've shown how we can take a look at each of those levels through this high-level dashboard with those key KPIs that we care about. And we've shown 2 vignettes where we can show the value that IT is providing for the rest of the business, and then identifying applications for rationalization, redeployment, and reinvestment. Now, since we're going quick and I want to make sure we're staying at time, we're going to go ahead now and hop into FinOps. So now we talked about TBM. Now we're going to hop into FinOps. Quick plug for the FinOps Foundation. It's a nonprofit foundation. I would encourage everyone join. It's absolutely free, and you'll get great information on best practices, other practitioners, use cases, and wherever you are on your cloud journey, there'll be something for you. Now, FinOps is broken up into 3 phases. So inform phase, optimize phase, and operate. And we're actually going to see these phases in our demonstration today. So I'll call those out. Take a look. You'll see those as we demonstrate our capabilities here. Now, we don't have time to show every aspect of some of these different capabilities, but I'll call out a couple of these. On the inform phase, our goal will be to show transparency. The optimize phase, we'll take a look at helping you with reserve spend and right sizing. And then on that operate phase, we'll take a look at a couple of different continuous improvement type value streams we can look at. So that's what we'll be showing for FinOps. I also want to quickly align that FinOps demonstration to some of our key personas. So in this case, we'll be taking a look at Elliott, CIO. They moved to the cloud. The bill is too high and they're shocked. They want to understand a little bit more about what is going on with their tagging, and then estimating, but also eliminating unused resources. We're then going to look at Felix, and we're actually going to spend most of our time with Felix. So Felix will be our hero for this FinOps demo, will be in his persona, his view of the world, and we're going to give him just a little bit more budget than $50K for this demonstration. So with that being said, I'm going to go hop in and pretend to now be Felix. So I might be going around my day as Felix, and all of a sudden I get an email that says, hey, wait a minute, you've actually exceeded your March 22nd budget. Well, if I'm this project manager, and maybe I have several applications that I support, several folks who roll up to me, I don't want to spend all of my time in a tool or multiple tools. I need proactive notifications and cost alerts to keep me abreast of exactly what's going on, so that when I need to take some action, I can do so efficiently. In this case, it looks like we are expected to exceed our budget for a given month, and we can go ahead and actually click in, and we'll hop into our Cloudability solution so we can take a look at why that is. So now I'm in our budgets and forecasting section. In this case, what I can do is just take a look at what my estimate is, take a look at how this projects to last month, and see some of those top spending drivers. Right now, though, we're taking a look at the entire organization, which might be appropriate if we're in more of a CFO, CIO type lens. But for our specific project manager, we need a more narrow view of the world. So I'm actually going to filter this down specifically for Felix. And it's this ability in FinOps to take these broad concepts like that budget and the forecast, take those in piecemeal to your project managers, your application managers, even individual developers, and then aggregate those together so you have a nice bottom-up approach. In this case, Felix is still projected less than last month, but if I actually overlay our budget, we can see that we're over budget and we might want to go ahead and figure out why. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of those phases of FinOps in our demonstration here to figure out what's going on and what I can actually do about it from Felix's perspective. And then we'll take that a step further and say, how about all of the Felixes of the world that roll up to our CIO if they all take action? That aggregate from all of those edge users will really add up to some significant cost savings. So if I'm Felix, I might start with a specific dashboard designed to give me information on all of those various sources of data. In this view, I might want to see my monthly estimated spend month over month. Some financial folks might want to see this quarter over quarter or year over year. And it's important that I can do this for all of the cloud providers in a single pane of glass. Both Felix and my CIO don't want to have to go to different sources of data, logging into different cloud consoles just to get similar information. Well, similar to that budget and forecast as well, I'm looking at all of my cloud spend. I want to section this down just to Felix. And something we actually see with organizations practicing FinOps, they might have 100 different slices of their cloud data with corresponding role-based access. And the goal of this is to empower each of those key users and key stakeholders to optimize their own spend, take responsibility for their own spend, and then go ahead and budget and forecast their own spend. So that's what we're really doing as Felix here. Now, I might see some interesting information here. So maybe I have some relevant KPIs, and I can see I've got quite a bit of untagged spend this month. So we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. I can see what my top services are and track and trend this growth over year type periods. And I actually might even want to click into any of these and pop out a report to drill down and get more information, more visibility. I can see my breakdown of costs by those cloud providers that I mentioned before. But if I'm Felix, I also might have some spend that's running in containers. So it'd be really helpful for me if I can also see my cluster spend on that same dashboard where I can see my general applications and those services that are really supporting me. Now, I mentioned Felix has growing cloud expenses and wants to understand what he can do about them. So I'm going to call your attention here to a couple key areas. We might identify some significant on-demand spend. So for cloud, the more that you commit to spend, the better a rate that you get. And so we want to reduce this on-demand spend as much as possible. So I might have some levers that I can pull here with some of the cloud providers and actually look at some RI buying to reduce my overall cloud bill. In addition, I might have some right-sizing savings. So as I move to the cloud, as I'm Felix, and all of my applications are now suddenly in AWS, Azure, and GCP, I might not have sized them correctly. Or going through that cloud migration, I might just have a little bit more service than what I actually need. So let's look at sizing those down to more appropriate workloads based on what I am actually using and see if we can get some cost savings from there. Finally, let me actually look at what's going into this untagged spend each month. Maybe I can identify this and actually allocate this to my applications so that we don't have this mystery or this black box around untagged spend. So for our goal today, we've just shown this, this visibility, this informed phase of FinOps. Our next goal is actually to start optimizing. So we're going to show a couple of those key optimization areas. Now, whenever we optimize spend, I'll call out a couple different things. We want to optimize using your reserve spend and reserve spend across multiple clouds. We also want to optimize based on things like savings plans or show you all of your reserve spend in the same place. For the purposes of time in our demonstration, what I'm going to focus on today is right sizing. So right sizing is really sizing up, sizing down resources to make sure that they are appropriate for your workloads. And when you see right sizing, you need to be able to right size by all of those different cloud providers. And you need to be able to right size whether you're in containers or not, all within one single pane of glass. Now, if I'm Felix, I might look at this number of recommendations for right sizing and say, hey, this is 6 pages of recommendations. This is way too much for me to handle. And most of this I'm not responsible for. So let's go ahead, similarly, filter down. So we're just looking at Felix's view of the world. So now we have significantly fewer recommendations. We might actually be able to go ahead and start actioning these. Now I want to figure out what I can actually start to save now versus what I might want to take a look at a little bit more. So we'll break up savings into 2 categories. So right-sizing savings will be savings we can achieve by just sizing down our workloads. So we'll take into effect things like your CPU, your memory, your network. And then based on that information, if the services you're using are a little bit too big, we'll size those down. But this might require me to look a little bit further at those. So I might want some of my engineering folks to take a look at these. In that case, what I can do is actually just do a quick comment. So I might just do a comment if I'm Felix and actually call somebody out. Well, we'll try to. Our demo environment doesn't seem to be cooperating too well. But the point there, we might want to get some more information before we actually start achieving these right sizing savings. The other savings that we're looking at are idle savings. So idle savings are savings we can achieve by turning things off and terminating them. So a good example would be maybe some of my EC2 resources that are 100% idle over my timeline. This could also be some of my EBS volumes that are unattached or my Azure disks that are unattached, things that I'm not using at all. And these are really low-hanging fruit that we can go ahead and achieve right now. For any of those recommendations for right sizing, you might want to push these outbound through an API. You might want to connect these with something like a Jira or a ServiceNow so you can actually track performance of these right sizing recommendations as well. Now, we'll go ahead and assume that Felix is able to come in here, properly assign these out, and take some action upon these. The next thing I want to call out is some of that untagged spend. So what you need to be able to do is visually explore all of your different tags with all of the values they actually have. In our example here, that application tag looks like it's not set over those last 3 days. So we might want to dig into that a little bit more and see if we can do something about that. Clicking in and drilling down, we'll see all of those singular resources where application is not set at the granular resource ID level. We might want to pop this out and actually go ahead and create a report that we can send outbound. So if I do that, I can have a Felix's untagged apps report that I can then subscribe to on a daily, weekly, or monthly cadence. So if I'm Felix, I might want to send this out to some developers on my team, maybe a couple of those app owners. That way I can make sure that all my cloud spend is tagged appropriately, and I know exactly which apps are consuming which spend. So we're going to do a little bit of time traveling now, and we're going to assume that Felix has actually gone ahead. He's made some changes, got some reserve spend, optimized some right sizing, and then done a little bit more tagging. And let's see the results of those actions. So in this case, now we're looking at forecasting outbound. forecasting 6 months range. We can see what our forecast looks like. We can see that we're over, and we can see that we're tracking and trending over that budget that I mentioned. But let's actually switch our view now. So now we're in our Felix future view. And this is the view where Felix is actually actioned upon some of those different optimization opportunities. So if we take a look now and compare this to our budget, I think we'll find that we're actually under. Excellent. So now we're tracking and trending under our budget. Now, you've seen everything in this demonstration, and it's really been from this project manager level. And I think it's so important to call this out, that such a big part of FinOps is about pushing accountability to the edge and then also building bottom up. So if we have 3 or 4 different project managers that all roll up to our CIO, and we have a scalable solution that lets us do this optimization, this budget and forecasting, this tag management at each of these levels, and then aggregate all of that, we'll see some very significant cost savings, cost optimization, and processes built out across our organization. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and turn this back to Vic, and I think we can answer some questions.
Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. Bob, turning it back to you.
That's great. There's a couple of questions in the chat. So Tatiana asks, could we capture all IT expenses in Aptio or only related to the cloud systems? So let's start with that one. And then I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more.
Sure. So putting my non-vendor agnostic hat on now, one of the great things about Aptio is that it was really designed for TBM. So it abstracts away a lot of the complexities with getting all those disparate data sources. So you can absolutely have all of those IT, not just expenses, but then related data sets, right? So we would grab on-prem servers data, CMDB data, anything that you have that could inform some of those allocations as we move up the model, we'd want to utilize that.
And then Tatiana kind of put a question out to everyone. What additional expenses costs do you see that need to be tracked beyond cloud? And how do you currently track your IT expenses costs and value provided? And I bet there's a varied sense of maturity levels, applicability of tracking costs, the difference between large organizations, small organizations, how costs manifest themselves. And so what would you provide as some insight, again, maybe taking that solution agnostic point of view that says, what would be a good place to just start? I mean, the models and the things that you showed are really extensive and they really get a lot of insight. But if somebody wants to put their toe in the water, so to speak, what advice would you provide for a place for folks to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, I'll actually, I'll share this taxonomy slide again. I think it's just a really great slide. And what we tend to see is that we'll start with really just a couple basic data sets. So yeah, I mentioned that GL earlier. General ledger is a great place to start. So we can start there. We actually have machine learning to go ahead and then categorize that general ledger into these cost pools. And we have some additional machine learning to categorize things like different vendors into these IT towers. So really, wherever you are, we can meet you there. Something else that Aptio does, Aptio actually has a lot of these various ways of transforming raw data so that you can use various sources of raw data. But I'll say even more specific, or excuse me, less specifically, more vendor agnostically, the goal is really to start wherever you are. No one has perfect data. No organization that is involved in TBM is absolutely the gold standard. So my advice would be just go ahead and start.
Perfect. Such a good modern sense of take an iterative approach, add some agility, start somewhere, fail fast, learn quickly, and really attack this. So I want to thank you for your insight and presentation, and Vic for all the hard work that you put in to provide the overview around business management and all the great work that you're doing. We do respect everyone's time, and we're going to end on time. If you have additional questions and want to pass those along, you can do that to the SIM board. You can get in touch with Tatiana or any of the board members. Really appreciate everyone's attention tonight. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.